Another student killed as fresh riots rock Jakarta. India detonates 2 more nuclear explosions despite world condemnation. And the budget sell begins, but focus switches to the dollar and tax.
From National 9 News, this is Nightline with Jim Waley.
Good evening. There's been another day of confrontation between protesters and Indonesian police on the streets of Jakarta. At least 1 person has been killed in the latest clashes, and there are reports of many more injured. The fighting broke out as students mourned the 6 protesters shot dead yesterday. From Jakarta, Adrian Brown reports.
What started as a day of mourning quickly turned into a riot. The angry mob setting fire to vehicles on the streets surrounding the prestigious Trisakti University. The anger at the deaths of 6 students there yesterday was clearly visible. Police, bombarded by rocks, responded by firing their weapons. At one point, the mob commandeered a dump truck, intending to ram the police line. But when they opened fire, the students jumped off. The truck careered into the crowd. Security forces succeeded in forcing back the protesters and sealing off the university. The latest trouble erupted as thousands of students gathered at the university, some laying wreaths for their dead colleagues. Opposition leader Megawati Sukarno Putri addressed the crowd calling for calm and pleading with security forces not to shoot their own people. Yesterday's confrontation was the most deadly in the 4-month-long crisis. Police fired a fusillade of bullets as they charged the students. Most fired into the air, but some clearly leveled their rifles at protesters. As the streets were cleared, some of the injured faced a second dose of violence.
They shoot us like we're an animal, you know.
At hospitals, grieving families huddled together for comfort. Inside the wards, prayers were read over the victims. The shock at the killings has clearly heightened tensions in Jakarta, sharpening the focus of calls for the resignation of President Suharto.
Well, Adrian Brown now joins us from Jakarta. Adrian, with night falling there now, any sign of an easing in the tension?
A slight easing, but there are still fires burning in many parts of the city. I've just come back from the university close to where yesterday's bloodshed happened, and a street close to there it's like a war zone. I mean, showrooms have been torched, petrol stations have been set alight, shops have been looted, homes have been destroyed. The damage is quite widespread, and there are still groups of people, mobs, hanging around on the streets tonight. And what this sort of illustrates in a way is that, in a sense, this is not the students who are responsible for this. It's as if criminal elements have now hijacked their cause.
You've mentioned criminal elements. One of the most worrying factors must be the type of people joining the protests and who they represent.
Well, that's it. I mean, there's all this talk of a third element of agent provocateur, people set out deliberately to discredit the students. And of course, when you see cars being hijacked, buildings being set alight, mobs running amok in a street, it gives the security forces the perfect excuse to open fire, which is what they've been doing again today.
Well, clearly the government is prepared to use its security forces, but is there any sign that President Suharto may soften his stance at all?
Well, there is a report tonight that he's going to come home early. At the moment, as you may know, he's on an official visit to Egypt. He was due to return here at the weekend. There is talk that he may come home sooner. There's also been another report tonight that the country's economics minister has said that, well, yes, perhaps we should listen to the students' demands. Maybe they're right. Maybe we've been wrong in not listening to the students sooner. So there's definitely a political momentum building here. Today at the university campus, which was next to where the violence happened yesterday, we were treated to a visit by Mr. Amin Rais, who's the most prominent Muslim leader in the country, and also by Megawati Sukarno Putri, the daughter of the former president of Indonesia. Both of them have pledged support to the students, and I think the prospect of a prominent Islamic leader leading his Muslim supporters in the streets of Jakarta is something that will unsettle the government greatly.
Adrian Brown, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
India has snubbed international condemnation of the nuclear tests carried out earlier this week, tonight exploding 2 more atomic devices. The government says that completes the series of experimental blasts, but that will do little to dampen global anger. The United States and Japan both threatening to cut off aid and clamp down on development grants.
On Monday, the Indian Prime Minister announced the first explosions at a press conference in New Delhi. There was no hint at that time that more were to follow, but today his government has announced 2 more, which it says completes India's planned series of experimental blasts. A statement says that they were in the sub-kiloton region, carried out in the same area of India's western desert state of Rajasthan, close to the Pakistan border. In Tokyo, where there have been demonstrations outside the Indian embassy, the government has said that it's considering sanctions against India, including a freeze on yen loans and aid grants, while America is reported to be considering the same, halting all US aid to India and restricting the export of equipment of potential military use.
I also urge India's neighbors not to follow suit, not to follow down the path of a dangerous arms race.
Pakistan's foreign minister has said that his government would not be dictated to by foreign pressure, a reference to international appeals for his country not to increase tension with a rival nuclear military program. We have made it absolutely clear, he said, that any step of nuclear escalation will find a matching response from Pakistan, and we stand by that commitment.
Here at home, a man who held police at bay outside Melbourne's Crown Casino tonight, claiming he had a bomb, has given himself up. The standoff, which lasted 4 hours, started when the man, believed to have personal problems, parked his car outside the casino and began threatening staff early this evening. Police negotiators were called and the front of the complex cordoned off. A search of the vehicle after the man surrendered found no explosives. One of Australia's youngest convicted killers has been sentenced to a minimum 7 years jail for the murder of a British tourist 2 years ago. The boy, who was 13 at the time and cannot be identified, admitted stabbing 23-year-old Gawan Waley to death in the inner western suburb of Matraville. Co-accused 20-year-old Richard Soriano was sentenced to 4.5 years jail after pleading guilty to manslaughter. Waley had been in Australia on a working holiday. His family is disappointed at the length of the sentences. It's believed the young woman, whose body was found in a burnt-out car in southern Queensland yesterday, was fighting a custody battle. Her 2 little girls also died in the fire. The burden of assisting police fell on the children's grandmother. Carrying family photos, she went to Ipswich Police Station as detectives awaited post-mortem findings. It's thought the dead woman was to appear in the family court today. The government's confidence that Australia is well placed to ride out the Asian economic crisis has not been echoed in international money markets. The dollar has hit its lowest point in more than a decade, trading in London tonight below the 63-cent mark. Laurie Wilson has our report.
Just 24 hours on, and the financial markets managed to take some of the gloss off the Treasurer's handiwork. The dollar plunging to a 12-year low as offshore traders developed a severe case of jitters about Australia's exposure to the Asian crisis.
Well, the major thing is concern about Indonesia in particular and Asia in general.
But the Prime Minister believes the budget surplus will underpin the currency in the longer term.
I don't normally comment on movements in the dollar. In the long term, though, this is a really classy budget for the financial markets because it's a genuine surplus.
The Treasurer says it's a case of providing solid economic foundations to weather the storm.
Now, when you've got instability whistling through the region, you don't want a house of straw. And you don't want a house of sticks. You want a house of bricks.
But economist and former Liberal Party leader John Hewson says the government is seriously underestimating the Asian crisis. It is, he says, the major weakness in the budget.
So I think it's a very dangerous and I believe a completely unwarranted assumption that the Asian crisis is a temporary phenomenon.
The Treasurer, though, was obviously unimpressed by Dr Hewson's assessment.
He's never had the opportunity to actually hold a ministerial office, so we'll never know whether he was right or wrong.
For Peter Costello, the next task is to put together his tax package, and he's already making all the right pre-election noises, suggesting the budget surplus will be used eventually to fund tax cuts.
The government shouldn't keep any money that it doesn't need. And if the government's got its debt under control and it's running in a surplus, it's the taxpayer that should be
the beneficiary.
Laurie Wilson reporting for Nightline.
After the break, mother found after children abandoned in the family car and hitting the catwalks for Australian Fashion Week.
On a current affair, the government home loan trap.
I've been ripped off, and it is criminal what they've done.
Aussie battlers drowning in debt.
We thought that we could trust the government.
Now the legal fight has begun.
I would have been rid of this nightmare that I'm in.